Hi, this is Dave, and before we get to the show, I wanted to ask you a favor. One of our goals this year is to grow the show so that What Does Star Wars Mean to You reaches more listeners. And that's where we're asking you for help. And it's really easy. Wherever you listen to us, please hit that subscribe button. If you're liking the show, give us a 5-star rating and review on the platform you listen to us. We make a lot of fun of the algorithm and the smash that button thing, but it really does help us get noticed by new fans. And if you want to join in on the conversation, find us on social at Star Wars Mean to You. That's Star Wars Mean, the number 2 in the letter U. Now, let's chat some Star Wars.
It was the air we breathed. It was everything.
Yeah.
And I mean, I think that it's impossible not to be influenced by it.
Hello there. This is Dave, and you're listening to What Does Star Wars Mean to You, the show where we talk to all kinds of fans of Star Wars. From industry insiders to indie artists, from mega collectors to obsessive mythologists, to find out how Star Wars impacted their life. Here's the thing, there's a lot of ways to look at Star Wars, and it's all from a certain point of view, and that point of view is yours. Now, I've always loved hearing people's passionate points of view on Star Wars because, for me, it reveals new ways of looking at the franchise. Also, let's just face it, it's fun to talk Star Wars. My guest today is a prolific writer whose various novels have won the Hugo, Nebula, Sturgeon, Lambda Literary, Crawford, and Locus Awards. She wrote the popular young adult Unstoppable trilogy, which include Victories Greater Than Death, Dreams Bigger Than Heartbreak, and Promises Stronger Than Darkness. She co-created the Marvel Comics transgender superhero Escapade and wrote her into the long-running comic The New Mutants. She's the science fiction and fantasy book reviewer for the Washington Post, as well as co-host to the podcast about the meaning of science fiction called Our Opinions Are Correct. But most recently, she wrote the story My Mouth Never Closes, which is about everyone's favorite Sarlacc pit for, from a certain point of view, Return of the Jedi. Please give a warm hello there to Charlie Jane Anders.
Hi, thanks so much for having me. This is so awesome.
Thank you, Charlie Jane. Tell me, are you ready to share with the world what does Star Wars mean to you?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I love Star Wars. I love kind of geeking out about it. So yeah, I'm a huge fan, and I love to kind of get into it. I've pretty much loved Star Wars my entire life, which is, it's weird to think now. It's just always been there, and it's something that I've really adored since I saw the first movie. And I love its approach to space battles. I love the kind of bigness and the epic scale of it, but like how kind of small and relatable it still manages to be, and how, it's just, the Star Wars universe feels like just a really colorful, kind of fun place. It's full of like weird aliens, like, unlike certain other science fiction franchises I could mention, you don't just have a bunch of people with like rubber things glued to their foreheads. You have like just tons of weird creatures and tons of like just interesting, like this, the galaxy is just full of like weird little nooks and crannies. And I love the notion of this kind of spiritual entity, the Force, that can either be, kind of benevolent and peaceful and good, or, really terrible and destructive. And I think that that's actually, that's such a fertile idea. It's a good spin on the whole idea of like good magic and bad magic, or like light magic and dark magic. And it feels like it's a dichotomy that allows for a lot of really interesting storytelling.
Yeah, what you're saying about the mysticism is almost a responsibility of intent, because you can be Palpatine in like, oh, I'm going to use this force for evil and my own purposes, or you could be like the Jedi Council and mistakenly believe what you're doing is correct.
Mm-hmm.
That's just a joke on the Jedi Council.
No, I get it. Yeah, no, I mean, the prequels obviously complicated things a lot in a lot of ways.
Yes.
I mean,
I'd argue in some good ways, because it allows for expanse and looking at, like, uncovering further stories that feel human.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. Like, I think that the prequels, in some ways, are George Lucas's attempt to kind of add more political complexity to, like the original trilogy. It's the politics of the original trilogy are pretty simple. There was a republic, it's fallen. Now there's an evil empire. It has to be destroyed. They've got this terrible weapon. That has to be put out of action. We eventually have to like kill the emperor, and it's about like dethroning the evil empire that replaced the republic. And then the prequels kind of add a lot more complexity and kind of nuance to that and create like this much more complex parable of like exactly why the republic fell and what it was about the republic that made it vulnerable to overthrow or to kind of subversion by Palpatine. And, you know, one of the things I really do love about the prequels is how ambitious they are in that way and how they want to talk about like the fragility of democracy, which I think is like kind of a timely theme right now.
Absolutely. Let's do a little thing I call 5 with the Force. So this is just to get your baseline Star Wars, your Star Wars fandom baseline. It's just 5 pretty simple questions. The first one, which Star Wars movie is your go-to favorite?
Oh, I mean, I'm going to say Empire Strikes Back. I'm completely conventional in that way.
Yeah, I am the same way. It feels as though people of a certain age kind of they fell in love with the OT. Empire seems to be their movie. For this one, I need to roll a d6, and I got a 4. What is your favorite droid from the series?
Oh, man. I mean, I'm going to actually, especially after reading that story in the Return of the Jedi anthology, I'm going to say C-3PO. I actually feel for that guy. I feel like he's so smart. He usually is right about everything. And people just kind of treat him like garbage. And I feel like he's actually kind of an underrated character who is just, he's long suffering, but he's also just like very loyal, even though people are not particularly loyal to him. So yeah, I'm going to definitely stick up for C-3PO.
Oh, that's a good one. I love it. Number 3, what is your favorite line to quote?
Oh, man. That's a really good, it really varies. I mean, sometimes it's like, judge me by my size, do you? Sometimes it's just, I've got a very bad feeling about this. I think I'd probably going to have to go with, I find your lack of faith disturbing, just because that comes up in so many contexts.
Yeah, I have a working theory that in corporate America, you can use almost any Star Wars line in any corporate meeting.
Very, very fair. Yeah, no, absolutely.
Yeah. Can you do any Star Wars impressions or impersonations?
Not well. No, not really.
This is one. Anytime someone says no, a guest in the past did this one, and it's so good. It's an easy one. Anyone can do it. Gonk.
Oh yeah, okay. I will. Next time I'll remember that one. That is a good one.
And besides the movies, what is your favorite Star Wars content? This could be a TV show, a comic book, a novel, a game.
I mean, there's so much. I love everything that Alyssa Wong has been doing in the Dr. Aphra comics. I think that those are freaking amazing. A lot of the recent comics that I've read have been just fantastic. I'm gonna say, like, you know, I have been a huge fan of John Ostrander in the past, who, you know, he used to write a lot for DC Comics back in the day. He rebooted the Spectre for them. He kind of created the Suicide Squad, and you could see him briefly in James Gunn's Suicide Squad movie. He has like one scene, which apparently was the only way they could actually pay him for having created the Suicide Squad. And he's a fantastic writer, and I've been a fan of his forever, pretty much since I discovered his Suicide Squad comics, I guess. And he wrote some really great Star Wars comics back in the day. Specifically, he wrote a whole bunch of comics about Quinlan Vos, who's like a kind of gray Jedi during the Clone Wars. And I wish that they would do, there was a Quinlan Vos omnibus, but it doesn't cover all of the comics. It just covers like the first couple of arcs. And I wish that they would do like a giant, like, doorstopper thuddy omnibus of all of his Quinlan Vos comics, because they're all just amazing. And like Quinlan Vos really struggling with, like, especially when he's sent to go undercover and kind of cozy up to Count Dooku, and like he's already kind of wobbling on the edge of the dark side, and you know, they're just like, the Jedi are like, yeah, go pretend to be on the dark side, and he's like, uh-oh, and he kind of very teeters on the edge of the dark side, and eventually just kind of quits being a Jedi, I think. But I love that character. I was actually kind of disappointed by how he was handled in the Clone Wars cartoon, which I generally loved that cartoon, but I felt like they didn't really. It wasn't the Quinlan Vos I had grown to love, really. And like Ostrander also did a very, very underrated comic called Star Wars Legacy, which takes place in the far future, and it's like a descendant of Luke Skywalker. And I feel like if you're going to have Mark Hamill showing up all the time, which apparently we are now. Like, I mean, it's not actually Mark Hamill. It's kind of Mick Mark Hamill. It's like the kind of, it's just like a heavily processed version of Mark Hamill. If you're going to have him showing up all the time, I'd love to see him be used in the way he was used in Star Wars Legacy, where this kind of like drug addict, kind of loser descendant of Luke Skywalker keeps seeing his ancestor. Like Luke just keeps appearing to him as a Force ghost and being like, dude, get your shit together. Come on. And I actually really loved those comics. I still have them all somewhere. They're super fun. They make some really good use of like the post kind of Yu John Vong kind of status quo from the old, Star Wars expanded universe.
Yeah.
All that stuff that is like now like Tears and Rain, it's just gone. But but it was, I loved those comics. The Star Wars Legacy, they're genuinely great. Yeah. They had great artwork. It was all Jan Duursema, I think.
It was fantastic. It was fantastic stories, and like that from I don't know what it was called now, but when it was the alien species from the other galaxy coming in.
Yeah, the Yuuzhan Vong.
Yeah, the Yuuzhan Vong. I
loved that.
I picked those up after they were kind of all out and just binged the whole series.
Oh, nice.
It was spectacular.
I guess I've still only really read the Ostrander comics from that whole storyline. I haven't read the rest of it, so I don't know. It's probably hard to find at this point.
Yeah, it's I think they're have re-released some in the Legends banner.
Oh yeah.
Now,
okay.
What first introduced you to Star Wars, and can you describe that experience?
Yeah, I mean, it's funny because like my first memories of Star Wars are actually like my local public library had a old timey like film projector-y thing that you could borrow. They had a room you could watch stuff in it. And it was like either that or we didn't have VCRs yet. This was like just before VCRs became a thing. And they had a thing called Hardware Wars, which you could watch that they had just gotten a copy of from somewhere. And it was like a fan-made Star Wars spoof by this guy named Ernie Fossilius. I'm pretty sure the whole thing's on YouTube now. Yeah. It's arguably the first ever Star Wars spoof. And it's extremely silly. Han Solo is named Ham Salad. The type, like everything is like hard. It's like basically housewares. Like R2D2 is a vacuum cleaner. Like the TIE fighters are like pieces of toast shot out of a toaster. It's just it's extremely silly.
I seem to remember there was an iron as a spaceship.
Yeah, there was an iron. No, there was an iron. Yeah. And like my favorite part is when like Princess Leia is captured by whatever they call Darth Nader, I think is what they called him. And Darth Nader is like he's kind of just making noises. He's like, and she's like, I don't know what you're saying. He's like, and then he points to a basketball, and she's like, no, basketball's a peaceful world. We have no weapons. And then he like presses a button and the basketball blows up, and she's like, no, basketball. And like it was extremely silly. And like I watched that like 100 times, like because you could just watch it as many times as you want to. We didn't have a VCR in my house yet. I know I saw the original Star Wars at some point, but I saw that like many, many, many times.
So did seeing Hardware Wars first kind of color your viewing of Star Wars?
I mean, I feel like a lot of stuff made more sense. I mean, you were just like marinating at Star Wars at that time. Like it was just like Star Wars was everywhere. It was everything. So you couldn't really like, I don't know. We were like, I feel like I just learned everything about Star Wars by osmosis.
Yes, it was easy to do back then.
Yeah, it was. It was ginormous.
So what were some of the things that you interacted with on a daily basis that kind of kept you in the Star Wars fandom? Things like, did you have a favorite toy? Did you read the books? Did you write fan fiction?
I think I read some of the Marvel comics back then. I definitely I was in I know that I was involved in kind of low-key involved in Star Wars fandom in the early 80s as a little kid because I remember I must have read a zine or something where they talked about this. Like there was a fanzine that I picked up somewhere at a comic book store or I don't know where they were speculating about all that stuff from Empire Strikes Back about like there is another Leia could hear Luke through the Force. They were like, okay, clearly Return of the Jedi is where Leia becomes a Jedi, and like she's the Jedi who returns. And like I was like, that's awesome. I'm here for Leia becoming a Jedi. And I remember even just as a little kid being kind of disappointed by Return of the Jedi and by Leia not getting to, like, Luke gets to be a Jedi, but Leia doesn't. And I was like, well, we already saw him train as a Jedi in the second movie. I wanted to see her now follow in his footsteps and become a Jedi.
Yeah.
And I remember just being like, yeah, okay. I mean, there was a lot to love about that movie, but I remember just being like, but where's Leia's Jedi training? I don't get it.
I think the traditional, for any fandom within that starts out when you're a child, I feel like the traditional thing is for the fandom to go to sleep for a little bit inside you and then reawaken later in life where you're like, oh, I love this. Did you have that kind of experience with Star Wars?
I mean, I think Star Wars, even during that long period between like Return of the Jedi and, the Phantom Menace, which was, I guess, like 15 years.
Yeah.
Star Wars, it never really went away. It was just such a huge cultural juggernaut that I was just, there were times when I wasn't thinking about it as much because like there wasn't like a new Star Wars thing that was like huge, but I was always like reading some comics or, some of the novels for sure. And, I feel like with some of these things, it's a little bit out of sight, out of mind. I mean, I'm the kind of Doctor Who fan who during the long hiatus where Doctor Who was off the air, like never stopped kind of obsessing about Doctor Who. But I think that if I'm to be honest, my Doctor Who fandom is probably it's a little bit more front of mind for me than my Star Wars fandom. Like I love Star Wars, but I'm more obsessed with Doctor Who. And, but I think like both with Star Wars and Star Trek during those times when they were kind of off the air or off, not in theaters, it was definitely a little bit more kind of receded a little bit, I guess. But yeah, I mean, I feel like, and then of course when Phantom Menace came out, it was like, oh, okay, there's a new Star Wars movie. Dang, that's exciting. Like it was just like, there was a lot going on in my life in 1999. So I've got to admit that it was a very big year for me. And so Phantom Menace was like something that I was just like kind of pleasantly surprised that it existed, kind of.
Yeah. No, that totally makes sense. Was there anything about Star Wars that inspired you to become a writer or inspire you into your career, whether it was working as an editor for IO9 or if it's just becoming a writer?
Yeah, I mean, I think that, even just as a little kid, just being aware of Star Wars as like a cultural force, no pun intended, I was just like kind of in awe of the power of fandom and in the power of pop culture to kind of change people's minds and worlds. And like I feel like Star Wars was just always so epic and so huge and so kind of stirring. Like, I mean, I'm now having memories of like being a little kid forced to take violin lessons. I was never good at playing the violin. My teacher was trying to get me to play Twinkle Twinkle Little Star, and I was like, can I just play the Star Wars theme instead? And she was like, sure. And so I did. That was the first thing I learned on that freaking violin was like, it's a pretty easy tune to play, actually. It's just like it's a major open fifth and then it's actually pretty easy to play the main kind of melody. And so that's like, that was how they got me to practice the stupid violin. It was like they were like, okay, instead of playing Twinkle Twinkle Little Star, you can play Star Wars. And it was the air we breathed. It was like it was everything. And I mean, I think that it's impossible not to be influenced by it. And I definitely, when I was writing the young adult trilogy, there's a lot of Star Trek in there because it's got something that's sort of the equivalent of Starfleet, and it's got a lot of that same kind of like optimistic working together, blah, blah, blah kind of feeling to it. But it also has, the main character is a little bit of a Luke Skywalker. There is a little bit of and I love the feeling of like a grand epic destiny waiting for somebody who seems really ordinary. So yeah, I mean, I feel like when I was writing those young adult books, I definitely had Star Wars in the back of my mind, no question.
When you approach writing a novel, what are some of the differences from writing a young adult novel to writing more adult pieces for you?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely think that they are very different. And I've read young adult novels written by people who'd previously only written adult books where they didn't seem to make that transition as smoothly. Like they perhaps were just steeped in the YA world. And you can kind of tell. And I think that, there's a lot that's different about YA. The pacing is different. There's an urgency to it in YA. Things have to just be happening like really fast. But you have to have a lot of feels. You have to have a lot of like interpersonal stuff going on with the characters. It helps if you've got like a whole group of teenagers who can have like complicated stuff happening with their relationships within the group. And, I spent a lot of time just like trying to figure out how to write more in a YA style. Like I tried to change my writing style to be more YA by studying a bunch of other YA books and just thinking about how they did it and just trying to kind of keep things like snarky and funny, but also just really emotional and intense. I ended up having to kind of rewrite the first book of my YA trilogy a lot to just move faster. Like my editor was like, yeah, we need the characters to, like the main character has to leave Earth much sooner in this book because this book takes place in space. And if she's spending too much time on Earth before she goes to space, it doesn't feel like it's a book about space anymore. And so it was like, you kind of have to get to the action really fast. And so that was actually a fun challenge.
I'd like to talk about My Mouth Never Closes.
Oh, yeah.
A bit. So spoiler alerts, if you haven't read it yet, there's going to be spoilers. Jump ahead about 20 minutes and you'll be okay. Now, can you walk me through the process of writing for a anthology like From a Certain Point of View, Return of the Jedi?
Yeah, I was actually really happy with like how chill it was. Like, I mean, and I've been really lucky in general when I've dealt with like IP that's like owned by someone else. I've generally had a really like people usually are really open to my weird ideas, which makes me really happy. And, not what I necessarily would have expected, but it's been really just a fun ride in general. Like, I mean, I also had done a lot of work with Marvel recently, and it's been kind of similar in terms of like my wacky ideas are like, somehow allowed to just slide under the radar or something. But yeah, in this case, it was like, I got approached by Lucasfilm and Random House to do a story for this anthology, and I think they'd actually asked me previously to do one of the previous ones, and I had been too busy. But this time around, I was like, yeah, I really want to. I love Star Wars. This is such a fun project. The first two books were so fun, and this was like, the last chance to do one for the original trilogy, kind of. I'm sure that at some point they'll do it for the prequels, too. I don't know. Maybe they will. I have no idea.
I hope so.
I hope so, too. But so I got approached to do a story, and I thought about it for a minute, and like just my mind went to the Sarlacc, and I don't even know why. I just was thinking about like all the weird stuff in that book, and I was like, has anybody claimed the Sarlacc yet? They were like, no, and I was like, awesome. And then I just pitched this idea of like, okay, so the Sarlacc is actually a vegetarian and really wants people to stop tossing other people into its mouth because it actually doesn't eat meat, and it's just really annoyed that people keep doing this, and it's actually really uncomfortable to have slowly decomposing meat inside your stomachs for like thousands of years, which is what we're told happens. And so, they were just like, sure, do it, go for it. And I was like, awesome. And then, I spent a lot of time rewatching like the first half hour of Return of the Jedi, rewatching the bits of the Book of Boba Fett where the Sarlacc pit shows up. Just to kind of make sure that I had all my ducks in a row. Like specifically, especially the choreography of that big scene where they're on Jabba's sail barge and they're fighting and people are falling in. I was like, okay, have to describe this sequence from the Sarlacc's point of view, which means I need to know exactly who falls in when and how and what's, like every single move of that has to be accurate because, otherwise it's not going to work. And like, but I also read like, there are people who've written scientific papers about the Sarlacc. Like there are people who've like speculated about Sarlacc biology at a really deep level. And I was like, okay, great. Like, people have like, just for fun, I think like exobiologists have like speculated about what if this creature was real. And I actually had like a list of like footnotes that I was going to include. And they were like, no, we're not going to have footnotes in a Star Wars anthology, or no, we're not going to have a list of sources at the end of the story. So I've got that probably still somewhere. I could post it somewhere probably. But yeah. And then, I handed in my first draft and I just kind of threw a lot of spaghetti at the wall, to be honest. Like I had a whole thing where the Sarlacc is listening to Max Rebo playing on the sail barge, and the Sarlacc has never heard music before, and the Sarlacc is like, oh my god, this is the greatest thing ever. Max Rebo is a genius. I'm going to become the president of the Max Rebo. I'm going to become the president of the Max Rebo fan club. And like, my editor was actually very wise and very correct in saying, yeah, this is kind of all over the place. Can we just like focus it in on like the main parts of the story? But they let me keep the dialogue between the Sarlacc and C-3PO, which I feel like really kind of is how I bring things home in the story, because the Sarlacc, this is the first time the Sarlacc has gotten a chance to talk to anybody since it got stuck on this planet. And C-3PO, because C-3PO speaks every language. I was like, well, of course C-3PO speaks Sarlacc. Why wouldn't he? And that actually, I felt like that got to kind of a poignant place. So I was really happy about that. But they were like, let's keep it mostly focused on like the central idea and like not like have this whole digression about like wanting to be the Max Rebo fan club leader, because it was honestly just, there was too much clutter in the story. So I think it was very correct that they asked me to kind of tighten that up a little bit.
And I loved how C-3PO in the Sarlacc pit talked to each other almost via sign language. It was because the Sarlacc kind of spoke through the motions of its tentacles, and C-3PO could answer through his hands and fingers. And I just thought that was a great kind of touch to how does this thing communicate beyond just a vocal pattern.
Yeah, I mean, I'm anybody who's read my work will know that I'm really obsessed with like aliens who communicate in a very different way than humans. That's a thing that pops up in my work a lot, and like very different like forms of communication. And it kind of made sense to me. I mean, you could argue that you could definitely make a case that the Sarlacc are not a social species because they tend to drift alone. And so would they have language? I decided yes. And like I was allowed to go with that because it allowed the Sarlacc to have a whole conversation, which I was really happy to have. But, you could argue either way. I thought that if they did communicate, it would be because you see those tentacles wriggling around a lot.
Yes.
If you watch Return of the Jedi, it's definitely doing something with those tentacles. And, I was like, it's trying to talk to somebody and nobody's responding. And so it's frustrated.
It's almost like someone's piling food onto your plate and you're holding up your hands going, no, stop, I'm vegan, please, no more meatballs.
Yeah, basically. I mean, it is actually, it's pretty much exactly like that.
I really also liked about the Sarlacc pit that here's this creature that you kind of saw as bad or as an evil obstacle, and you reframe it to become this creature that is kind of peaceful. He or she is a vegan. They want to just commune with nature around them. And how did you make that leap from this is a misunderstood creature? Yeah,
I mean, I'm trying to remember. I think it's partly just that, if the Sarlacc lives for thousands and thousands of years, which apparently they do, like apparently they live for thousands of years, and, they have this very slow digestive process, which again is one of the few pieces of information we're given about them in the actual movie. Like they're pretty much sessile organisms. They don't run around. They find a place and just stay there. They don't seem like creatures that have like a big agenda. They don't seem like creatures that, want to conquer anything or kill anybody, and in fact, my guess is that organisms that live that long that have that slow a metabolism are going to be happier just kind of like eating vegetation and kind of chilling out just because, I feel like I think of trees or whatever, or turtles. Turtles live a really long time. Turtles can live 100 years, and like turtles don't really try to conquer the world. As far as we know. I mean, maybe that'll be the next Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles movie. It'll be like, the evil turtles will show up.
Yeah. It's the world is going to shell.
Nice. There you go. Yeah, exactly.
Thank you. If you could write in any era of Star Wars for your next project, what era would you like to write in? It's High Republic, Old Republic, prequel, original, or sequel, or any other?
I mean, another thing Ostrander did that I thought was interesting, I didn't love it quite as much as his other Star Wars work, but he did do a mini-series about like the origins of the Force, which was really interesting. And he was trying to kind of show this is where Jedi and Sith come from. And I can't remember if he actually got to complete that miniseries or what happened with it. I bought all the issues that came out, and I remember thinking it was like an interesting experiment. I mean something like that, something about like the original, like I feel like people keep pitching that. Like there was a movie in development at one point that was like the
Yeah.
origins of the Force. And I feel like that would be really fun to do. I think High Republic would be really fun just because it's, I'm super excited for The Acolyte. I cannot wait for that show. That show is going to be so amazing. Um, but I mean, also, I as a viewer, as an audience member, I really want to know what comes after The Rise of Skywalker. I would love to go back to like 100 years after, the original trilogy, like what they were doing with those Yuuzhan Vong comics and novels. Whatever, obviously that's no longer canon, but whatever is happening 100 years after the original trilogy, like whatever form that takes. And, because part of what I liked about that kind of much later timeline is that the Sith have evolved. They're not quite the same anymore. They're starting to get rid of the rule of two. Never entirely understood the rule of two. Like, why wouldn't you want to have like an army of Sith? I'm always just like, but aren't more better? I don't know.
We talked about the Acolyte. What else would you like to see in the future of Star Wars?
I mean, if Rian Johnson ever does get around to making that trilogy that he was going to make, I would love to see that. That would be amazing. Yeah, I mean, what I'm obsessed with that I feel like nobody talks about anymore, but like George Lucas was developing a Star Wars TV show like 10 years ago, like before he sold Lucasfilm to Disney. More than 10 years ago, I guess, where it was, and it was supposed to be sort of set in the lower levels of Coruscant. It was going to be like some kind of, show about like the underbelly of Star Wars. And allegedly 50 scripts were written, allegedly. And, you occasionally heard names bandied about who worked on those scripts, and they were some really amazing writers. And it was a live action show, and he couldn't, even though he had so much money, he couldn't raise enough money to make the show the way he wanted to make it at the time. And those scripts are just sitting in a vault somewhere, man. And I used to, back when I was working at IO9, because I was always trying to break news, I was always trying to get a scoop, but I was also just so curious. And I somehow, through just like poking around, found the name of some VFX person who'd done some VFX tests for the show. I just kept calling like every week. I just had a note set in my calendar to call every week to see if this guy would pick up his phone, so I could just like see if I could get him to talk about this show. And I never did, and it never worked out. And he probably wouldn't have said anything anyway because he was probably under NDA. But I just wanted like, tell me anything, man. Tell me like what the starships look like. Tell me anything. So I sometimes just sit and think about those 50 scripts and what's in them. And if they were going to be as good as, I mean, the Clone Wars cartoon was the thing that Lucas developed towards the end of his time running Lucasfilm. And he brought on, like, I was just looking back at who worked on that. The writers included people like Paul Dini and, Jose Molina, and like some really amazing writers worked on Clone Wars. So, I want to, even if they just put out a book of those 50 scripts or like, a series of books, if I could just read those scripts, I just want to know, man.
That would be amazing if Marvel just took those scripts and made a comic book out of them, and just like
seriously.
What is your favorite Star Wars memory besides learning the fanfare on violin?
Oh my God, that's a tough one. I mean, I got to be one of the first people to see The Last Jedi because I was, because I was still working as a journalist at the time, and I got to go to an early screening in like a Dolby theater with like amazing sound and like a really, really, really good screen. It wasn't like IMAX, but it was a really, really good screen. It was like the Dolby screening theater in downtown SF. And that was just like getting to see that before almost anybody, like for the first time. I was like, dang. Like I really loved that movie. That's definitely my second favorite Star Wars movie. And I just remember being like the colors, like, that scene where they're fighting all the Red Guards and everything, and it's just like so beautiful.
The screens are burning down around them.
It's such an epic film. It's such an epic, like stubbornly weird film. It's a movie that just refuses to just do what you're expecting, but it's just so like big and epic and amazing.
One of the things I loved about the advertising of that film was they used Luke's line to basically said what everyone's reaction was. This is not going to end the way you expect.
Right.
And I love that they did that.
Yeah.
Is there one particular moment or scene from Last Jedi that you particularly think of above as iconic to you?
Yeah, I mean, I actually, for some reason, I keep thinking about like maybe because I keep seeing other Star Wars media where like telekinesis is like a big deal. It's like in Ahsoka, it's can you do telekinesis or not? But like I keep thinking lately about that moment where like towards the end where like Rey has been scoffing at this idea that you're just like moving rocks around, and then there's like rock fall, and she's like, oh yeah, moving rocks around, and she just like,
Yes.
I don't know, for some reason I really love that. I love the Admiral Holdo maneuver, even though people have criticized it. I thought it was beautiful.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, and also that line, which I've occasionally think about. I don't have any tattoos, but I occasionally think it's something I might get as a tattoo. That line that Rose Tico has is like, "That's how we'll win, not by hating what we hate, not by destroying what we hate, but by saving what we love." Like that line. Holy shit.
Yes.
Like that's a line that I think about a lot. It comes back to me like very often. It's one of the like top 5 quotable lines in Star Wars for my money.
Yeah, and it is a line that sums up all of Star Wars in how many, like 8 words, 10 words. That's kind of thematically all of Star Wars is kind of all about a found family that's trying to save each other.
Yeah, absolutely.
What are the top 3 elements that make Star Wars for you?
Yeah, I mean, I'm going to say definitely like the space battles, like the fact that they have this kind of like very World War II dogfight approach to space battles, which is still, even now, super unique. I mean, Battlestar did it some too, but not in quite the same way. And I think the Force, I mean, I think that people are like, oh, you don't really need the Force. And obviously Andor proved you don't need the Force. But I really love the Force. I think that when it's done well, when it's done with a kind of Taoist mysticism, it can be just so powerful and so incredible. And finally, I don't know. I feel like, the found family stuff, like, and the fact that like you have like the 2 types of hero are rogues and like idealists, and they have to play nice together. And there's always going to be like the Han Solo and Luke Skywalker kind of dichotomy, and you need both.
Oh, that's great. I love that. So my final question for you. You go to Skywalker Ranch, and there at the gates, George Lucas greets you.
Oh my God.
What do you say to him?
Just thank you for giving us this amazing thing. Like, thank you for making my childhood so much better.
Yeah, it's true. It is.
Thank you for ham salad. I don't know.
Yeah, exactly.
I wonder if he's watched that. He must have watched that. I mean, come on.
He must have. I mean, as a, near independent filmmaker himself, someone, I mean, one of the things that's particularly amazing about Hardware Wars is the fact that it's a viral video well before the internet.
Yeah. Oh my God. Yeah.
Well, tell me, Charlie Jane, where can people find you?
I'm on Instagram and Tumblr as at Charlie Jane Anders. I'm on Blue Sky as charliejane.bluesky.social. I'm on Mastodon as at charliejane@wandering.shop. And I have a newsletter, actually. That's probably the best place to find me. I have a newsletter at buttondown.email/CharlieJane. And if you go to my newsletter, I published a thing that was like 9 hot takes about Star Wars recently. This is a thing I do occasionally where I'll have like 9 or 10 hot takes about like Batman or Star Wars or, some other sci-fi thing.
Oh, nice. I'm going to definitely check that out. I'll put links to that in the podcast notes.
Awesome. Rock on.
What are some of the projects coming up that you'd like to mention now? Do you have anything coming out soon?
Yeah, so New Mutants Lethal Legion, the miniseries, the most recent thing I did for Marvel, comes out in January as a trade paperback. And you can definitely pre-order that now in all the places where stuff is pre-ordered. I love how that turned out. It's basically like the classic, like you try to help your friends and it all goes wrong. Like Escapade, this trans superhero, tries to help her friend / ambiguous love interest, Sarabella, get over some trauma by like robbing a supervillain. And robbing a supervillain turns out to be a really bad idea. And that it just gets wilder and wilder as it goes along, including some very gratuitous Gilbert and Sullivan in the middle. And then I have a novel that I'm trying to finish right now called The Prodigal Mother, which I'm revising it. Probably not going to be out until 2025. But so, yeah, I mean, the main thing that you can get the Unstoppable trilogy, Promises Stronger Than Darkness, comes out in paperback in February, and all 3 books are out now already. You can get them from your library. The audiobooks are great. We got like Hynden Walsh, who's the voice of Starfire and Princess of Bubblegum, to do the first book on audio. So yeah, check those out.
Excellent. Well, we'll keep an eye out for all of those. And Charlie Jane, thank you so much for sharing what Star Wars means to you. I really appreciate
My
your
pleasure.
time and your point of view.
Awesome. Well, thanks for having me. And, may the Force be with you.
Hi, this is Dave, and before we get to the show, I wanted to ask you a favor. One of our goals this year is to grow the show so that What Does Star Wars Mean to You reaches more listeners, and that's where we're asking you for help. And it's really easy. Wherever you listen to us, please hit that subscribe button. If you're liking the show, give us a 5-star rating and review on the platform you listen to us. We make a lot of fun of the algorithm and the smash that button thing, but it really does help us get noticed by new fans. And if you want to join in on the conversation, find us on social at Star Wars Mean to You. That's Star Wars Mean, the number 2 in the letter U. Now, let's chat some Star Wars.